So I'd like to talk about Ezekiel 46 verse 1, which says, I'm going by memory, so I might mix translations here, but it says, Thus saith the sovereign Yahweh, the gate of the inner court that looks toward the east will be shut on the 6 working days, but it will be open on the Sabbath and in the day of the new moon. This verse was one of the first verses that was shown to me the first evening that I was introduced to the Sabbath being regulated by the moon and determined by the new moon. And it's a very powerful verse. A lot of people have tried to explain it away, but it is a very powerful verse because it separates the new moon from the 6 working days in the same way as the Sabbath is separated from the 6 working days. So you have the 6 working days mentioned in Ezekiel 46 verse 1. And that jumps us back to Exodus 28 through 11 with the 4th commandment, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. So you have the 6 working days, and the gate of the inner court is shut. But it'll be opened on the Sabbath day. And now the Sabbath day will never fall on one of the 6 working days. It's an impossibility. You always have the Sabbath fall on a different day and never interrupt the 6 working days. But in the same breath, and this is where people miss, the same breath you have the new moon mentioned. The gate of the inner court will be opened on the day of the new moon. And so a lot of people say, well, when the new moon falls on, let's say, like a Wednesday, which is one of the 6 working days regularly in the traditional Sabbath keeping method, and say, well, that means the gate of the inner court will be opened on a Wednesday. But the problem with that is that would interrupt the 6 working days. And so you'd have a working day on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. That's 3 working days. And then Wednesday you'd stop on the day of the new moon. So you only have 3 working days. And then you have Thursday and Friday, 2 more working days. So 3 working days here, 2 working days here, and a new moon day in the middle when the gate of the inner court is opened, and it's shut on 3 and it's shut on 2. That doesn't jive with the passage. The passage says it will be opened, it will be shut on the 6 working days, the gate of the inner court that looks toward the east. So it's a very powerful verse showing us that the new moon is not one of the 6 working days. And so when the first day of the month or the moon rolls around, because month and moon are interchangeable in the Old Testament scriptures, when the new moon rolls around, it's not one of the 6 working days. You don't count it as one of the 6 working days. It is a 3rd category of day. You have the Sabbath day, you have the 6 working days, and you have the new moon day. It's an extra day that Yahweh gives us to worship Him and to rest. It's not the Sabbath. A lot of people think Lunar Sabbatarians believe the new moon is the Sabbath, or is a Sabbath like as strict as the weekly Sabbath. And one brother I met called it a soft Sabbath, and I like that because it's not as strict as the weekly Sabbath when you study in the Scriptures. And so there's more than one Sabbath in the Scriptures in the loose sense of the word Sabbath, and they don't all have the same restrictions. So Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, has stricter regulations on it than the weekly Sabbath, and then the new moon has less regulations than the weekly Sabbath or the Day of Atonement. But you could still call it a Sabbath in the general sense of the word, even though it's not the Sabbath. One of the big things about Ezekiel 46 verse 1, even though it's not in the first 5 books of the Bible, which is the foundation of the Torah, it's a thus saith Yahweh text. Thus saith the Lord God, it says in the King James, and Lord is Adonai, and G-O-D there is all caps. It's the sacred name, Yahweh. Thus saith Adonai Yahweh. So it's not just a narrative text. It's not just a text where you're reading about a story about something somebody did. But it's a thus saith Yahweh text. Not that you can't learn from all the texts in the Scriptures, but when you have a text where Yahweh is speaking through a prophet, you'd better listen up and see what he has to say. So this text was, just amazing to me. I had missed a lot of the texts in the Old Testament that mentioned the new moon along with the Sabbath, but this was a big one because this let me know that when the new moon came around, that it wasn't one of the 6 working days, but it was the new moon day. It was a Sabbath, a holy day. And so after the new moon, you had 6 working days. And then you had the 7th-day Sabbath. And then you had 6 working days and the 7th-day Sabbath, and then 6 working days and the 7th-day Sabbath, and then 6 working days and the 7th-day Sabbath. So you'd have 4 weeks. 4 times 7 is 28. Plus the new moon at the beginning, that would be 29. And then when you got to the end of 4 weeks, guess what happened again? The new moon came back around. And somebody says, well, what about the months where you have 30 days? Well, that's for another video. We'll talk about that. There's intricacies in the Lunar Sabbath doctrine, just like there's intricacies in the Saturday Sabbath doctrine. People say, well, you don't always have 6 working days when that 30th day rolls around. And, that's debatable. I'll talk about that elsewhere. But you don't always have 6 working days with a Saturday Sabbath. I remember when I used to keep Friday evening to Saturday evening, and we'd have the Feast of Tabernacles, the fall feast come up, and you'd keep the first great day, the first high day, as we called it, on the 15th day of the 7th moon. And then maybe 3 days later, you'd have Saturday roll around. So you'd work 3 days, and then Saturday Sabbath you'd keep, and then you'd, work the rest, or at least you'd have feast days where you could work if you needed to during that feast. So you don't always have 6 working days with the Saturday Sabbath either. So, but Ezekiel 46 verse 1 was huge. It was huge that night. I remember I was like, man, how did I miss this text? Some people say, well, it's a text talking about the future. Sure, but don't you believe Yahweh's law is the same in the past as it will be in the future? Like people use Isaiah 66, Sabbath keepers use Isaiah 66 to show people that we'll still be keeping Sabbath in the new heavens and the new earth. That's beautiful, but just because it's future doesn't mean it's also past. So in Ezekiel 46 verse 1, Yahweh's not giving any future instructions that are different than past instructions. It just lets us know what the instructions are. So thus saith Yahweh text. Take some time to meditate on that. I wrote a whole chapter on that. One verse in a book that I co-authored with my father-in-law about Lunar Sabbaths. But anyhow, so much for this part, and I'll pick this up when Yahweh leads me to continue the discussion. Hope you have a good day. Shalom.